Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of ComFish. I'm Sarah Phillips, the Executive Director of the Kodiak Chamber of Commerce and the Manager of ComFish Alaska 2021. It's the second and final day of ComFish, and we're really hopeful that you found yesterday to be informative, social, and even fun. Forum presentations will begin right now this morning, but before we welcome our presenters, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors. Without them, we really would not have been able to gather in this inventive new platform. So please help us by supporting them. Our top level sponsors include Alaska Airlines, Matson, KVOK and Hot 101.1, Best Western Kodiakin, and Alaska Aerospace, with supporting sponsors Silver Bay Seafood, the City and Borough of Kodiak, Kodiak Daily Mirror, Linden Transport, Koniag, and Worldwide Movers. As a reminder, today is the last day to get 25% off all your ComFish gear at comfishak.com, where you can pick up shirts and fleeces, some stickers, and some really cute socks with crabs on them. But before we get started, I'd like to let all attendees know that if you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, you're really not getting the complete ComFish Alaska 2021 experience. Please visit comfishak.com to register and attend the fully interactive event. Those joining us today on the Hopin platform, thank you. You'll notice that you can submit questions during the forums, in the forum stage chat, and in the Q&A area, and the moderator will relay those questions to the presenters. After the forums, be sure to visit the expo, where you can interact with live representatives from exhibitor booths. Beginning today at 3:45 on the forum stage, we'll have drawings for some of the great prizes we have for attendees this year. Be sure to enter the drawing at the ComFish Alaska booth and Alaska Airlines booth to be entered to win the grand prize of 2 Alaska Airlines tickets. Many of our exhibitors are also offering great door prizes and discounts, so be sure to check out every single one of them. We've now come to the time that I'd like to introduce our first session of day 2 of ComFish. We're kicking off the morning with an update on the MSA Reauthorization. Joining us live today is Representative Huffman, who represents California's 2nd Congressional District, which spans the north coast of the state of California from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. He was first elected to Congress in November of 2012, and he currently serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the Select Committee on Climate Crisis. In the 117th Congress, he chairs the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, with a jurisdiction over federal water projects, fisheries management, coastal zone and oceans policy, and wildlife and endangered species. During his 4 terms in Congress, Jared has built a reputation as a progressive leader and an environmental expert who focuses on making a difference. Jared is also committed to ensuring our communities are resilient to the effects of climate change. He has been instrumental in defending America's coastlines from offshore oil and gas drilling, including legislation to protect the Pacific and Arctic Oceans as part of a coordinated nationwide effort to protect oceanic ecosystems and coastal economies while reducing our unhealthy dependency on fossil fuels. Please join me in welcoming Representative Jared Huffman.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for that great introduction. It is an honor to be with all of you as part of this great event. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to make it up to Alaska during our nationwide fisheries listening tour. We got interrupted by a global pandemic, but I do know how important sustainable, healthy fisheries are for the region and for so many communities in the great state of Alaska. And fortunately, we did, before the pandemic affected us, we were able to have a listening session in Seattle, and I know many Alaska stakeholders joined us there. And we've tried to continue the conversation with Alaska stakeholders in other ways too. So thanks for that. So as you may know, in an effort to really provide good process, I believe process is an important part of policymaking. We sought out as many opinions and viewpoints as possible in this listening tour as part of the MSA Reauthorization process. I had 8 listening sessions, covered 7 different management regions around the country. I was joined in several of these by my colleague Ed Case of Hawaii, and we heard from about 80 different experts and stakeholders as panelists through these various conversations, and many, many more by way of public comments, dozens of members of the public in person and online at each of these stops. We intend to continue this approach, maximum openness and inclusion. And I've already received over 50 letters with substantive feedback on this discussion draft that we've released last December. I expect we're going to continue to hear from a lot of people. And I want you to know that I will fully consider the feedback that we get through this process. I encourage everyone at this meeting today to reach out to my office with your feedback on the draft. And if you haven't done that already, just go to my website, and there's a section there on MSA Reauthorization where you're going to find everything you need. We're going to work on revising this discussion draft and getting it introduced as an actual bill with the bill number very soon. But I will tell you, based on the feedback we're getting, I think we're in a good place. I'm optimistic about this. And yet that doesn't mean that we're done taking input. So we want to keep hearing from you. We will keep trying to improve this bill through the process. And I'm going to try to work especially with your Member of Congress, Don Young, to try to make this bill bipartisan. Our draft includes what I think are very important and timely updates for fisheries management, as well as provisions to strengthen fishing communities. And you mentioned, Sarah, that I represent the entire north coast of California. So these issues are really near and dear to me and the communities that I represent. Many of the concerns that we've heard during the listening tour are addressed in this draft. And the draft is also intended to address the changing needs in fisheries management and science since the last time we reauthorized Magnuson, because it has been quite a while and there have been changes. So specifically, just by way of a high level outline of this draft, we've got a title on climate-ready fisheries that requires consideration of climate change and climate science in regional fishery management council priorities and their planning. I provide some new tools to address shifting stocks and other climate impacts on fisheries management. I don't think of this as any kind of heavy-handed mandate or dramatic shift. Some councils are already doing this, but one thing we've heard loud and clear as we've gone around the country is climate change is affecting just about everyone, and it really does have to be embedded in the consideration of how we go about managing our fisheries. We've got a title to support fishing communities, which improves disaster relief. We've got a title for working waterfront grants. We've got an increased support for seafood marketing by directing USDA and NOAA to collaborate more in this area. And this title also acknowledges the importance of subsistence fishing and how it's defined under MSA. We include a title to increase transparency and public participation. It increases representation of different viewpoints on regional fishery management councils, improves transparency and accountability and stakeholder participation, and also expands coverage of NOAA's sexual assault and sexual harassment policies, including, and we've come to understand that this is just very, very important for fishery observers and council staff. We've got a title on fisheries data and technology. We know we need to expand electronic technologies and data management systems. We want to update cooperative research and management and improve data collection and methods. Everyone seems to agree on much of this. This title requires NOAA to develop operating plans for emergencies that make it impractical, such as a pandemic, to use human observers and to conduct stock assessments the way we've traditionally done it. The pandemic has taught us that we're going to have to be more nimble in these situations. And this title also requires NOAA to report on their progress in completing and prioritizing stock assessments. This work is too important to allow it to just come to a halt, even during tough times like a pandemic. So lastly, we've got a title to further increase sustainability. It strengthens essential fish habitat consultation. It builds on MSA conservation standards to improve outcomes for both overfishing and rebuilding, conserves forage fish, and replaces the term overfished with the term depleted to encompass what I think is obviously a much more complex set of threats to fish stocks, and also to address the concern I heard from a lot of folks in fishing communities that the term overfished, especially for fisheries that crash for reasons totally unrelated to fishing, is disparaging. So we've incorporated several bipartisan bills into this draft. That includes Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's Working Waterfronts Act. It includes Don Young and Senator Sullivan's American Fisheries Advisory Committee Act. And in closing, I will just reiterate that I'm really committed to keeping this as a collaborative, open, and transparent process. We will probably have some disagreements from time to time as we go through this, but we're going to work them out in public. And I do think that the return to good process, to transparency and inclusion, is our best chance of trying to get MSA reauthorization kind of back into a nonpartisan, collaborative problem-solving mode. So thanks again for inviting me, and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Representative. I have not seen any questions come in at this point in time, but we do have a little bit of a delay from our presentation to what our attendees see. And so we'll give it just a moment for any additional questions to come in. You can go ahead and post those in the chat area or in the Q&A area, if whichever one works best for our attendees here. But if you don't mind, could you just reiterate one more time where any attendees can send comments to your office?
Yes. And I don't know if any of my staff are logged in and can post anything in the chat area, but if you go to huffman.house.gov, that's my congressional website, and we have a special section there on Magnuson reauthorization, or just Google Congressman Jared Huffman. And we should have everything you need right there, including a link to send us your comments by email.
Okay, outstanding. We have had a question come in from Charles Peterson, who says, thank you for your leadership on MSA, which builds on science-based fishery management. Have you received input on climate change? Ready fisheries and support for fishing communities to shape the next draft?
Well, definitely. We got a lot of input in our listening sessions, and that input, was a little bit different in different parts of the country. If you go to the Atlantic coast, the shifting stock problem is really the main thing that people are talking about in terms of climate impacts. We have all sorts of fish moving north into the Gulf of Maine. In fact, they're sort of ground zero, I think, for just fundamental changes in the composition of their fisheries. And we've kind of had this venerable old process of these regional councils that have borders, and I don't think historically we contemplated potentially permanent shifts of some of these stocks out of those borders. So we need to consider that. We need to find ways for these councils to work together and to be nimble and adaptive to all of that. Now, if you go to places like the Gulf Coast, we didn't hear so much about shifting stocks, but we heard about dramatic changes to habitat. So pretty much anywhere you go, climate impacts are being felt. They are something that have to be considered as part of fisheries management, whether it's shifting stocks or dramatic effects on habitat. And that's why we've kind of crafted the bill the way we have.
Thank you. We have another question from Terry Haynes. You touched on this a little bit, but catch share programs have had an economic repercussions, including capital flight from fishing communities and a high entry level bar. Is that just an inevitable result of these programs?
Well, I hope it's not an inevitable result. I know that there have been some good outcomes from catch share as well, but I've heard those concerns that you just mentioned, and I think we need to continue to work through our regional councils to get it right. We want our fisheries to be accessible to everyone, including younger fishers and a new generation. And we don't want to have these extremely high barriers to entry.
Thank you. From an anonymous attendee, it's hard to say the two A's in a row there. When you say a bill is going to be introduced soon, please give us an idea on what that means, weeks or months?
Yeah, probably weeks, but I don't have an absolute date. But we have kept the feedback process open for quite some time, and I think most of the feedback is in. We'll continue to receive it. We'll continue to try to improve this bill as it goes forward, but we're getting pretty close to dropping the bill. And again, that doesn't mean we don't want to keep hearing from you. We're going to have hearings. We're going to move it forward. We will improve the bill at every step of the process if we can.
Okay. An additional question has come in from Natasha Hayden. She says, good morning, Congressman. Are you engaging in formal or informal discussions with Indigenous people, more specifically Alaska Native people, who have been dependent on the managed fishery resources for 10,000 years?
Well, I talked a little bit about subsistence fishing earlier in my remarks, and obviously we want to make sure that we are hearing from Native fishers and Indigenous communities. So please do take a look at our discussion draft and tell us what you think. But I think the short answer is yes, we are getting feedback from tribes and Indigenous communities, and we want to get more.
Fantastic. We have a follow-up from Terry Haynes, who says it has been proposed that the phrase "to the extent practicable" be removed from provisions of the reauthorized MSA. For instance, with regard to bycatch reduction. What is your position on this?
Well, we've heard a lot of feedback on that, and this isn't the first time that particular phraseology has been criticized. So I'm open to further discussion on this, and I think those who feel like different wording is more appropriate should make that suggestion and let us hear from you.
Thank you. We have another question from Lindsay Bloom, who says, what will the next round of Alaska listening sessions look like, or will there be field hearings in Alaska on the bill?
I don't know, quite honestly. I am kind of exploring a possible trip to Alaska in the late July timeframe. And if we can do some field work connected to our Magnuson reauthorization, I'm interested in that. I had a Zoom gathering with many of you folks from Kodiak just a few weeks ago and appreciated that. I'm open to doing more virtually. But I think we got a few more months of sort of pandemic protocol that will limit our ability to have a big, wide open public meeting in person anywhere. But, you know, it's probably not a very specific answer for you. I'd like to do a lot more, but if anyone, any communities in Alaska or anywhere else want to set something up virtually, we'll do it. And I'll also look for something in person over the summer.
Thank you. Here at the Kodiak Chamber of Commerce, the hosts of Comfish were absolutely happy to set something up for our community. We've had another question come in from Duncan Fields. He says, hello, Representative Huffman. As you prepare to submit MSA legislation, what do you see as the time frame for the legislation moving through Congress? Also, do you expect to have a parallel bill introduced in the Senate? Thank you.
Yeah, those are really good questions. I hope we will get a Senate counterpart, but honestly, we have been focused on just developing the best process and the best bill that we can. And I'm hoping that that is well received, and that, you know, the message is sort of received by our Senate counterparts that this is the way to go, and that that Senate collaboration will follow. In terms of hearings and timings, again, we haven't worked out the details, but I would expect we'll probably have a hearing over the summer in the Natural Resources Committee. I hope we can get the bill advanced through the House this year and not next year. And then that would give us time to work on the Senate side of things. But, you know, this is something I actually want to get done this Congress. I think we've been at it now for a couple of Congresses. In fact, two Congresses ago, I came very, very close to a bipartisan bill with Don Young, but we weren't really able to resolve our differences. I'm still working with Don, and you know, you might be surprised to hear that you know, a California liberal like me, an enviro, can actually sit down and have a productive conversation with Don Young. The truth is, I'm sure that we each say and do things that make each other cringe. And in my case, you know, he probably reaches for his buck knife, but we actually get along pretty well. I have a lot of respect and affection for Don Young, despite our great differences. And I'm going to make a great effort to get him on board and to listen to his perspective. I mean, he was one of the architects of Magnuson. So for lots of reasons, he deserves respect and inclusion in this conversation.
Of course, thank you so much. We've had another question come in that says a lot of what is proposed in the bill is going to require huge additional investments. The MSA is only authorizing language. Can you speak to how we can help support the funding that will be needed?
That is how it works. We create these authorizing bills, but then our work is not done. We have to make sure that funds are appropriated through that process and that our agencies have the resources that they need to carry out their mission. So I think it's just an important reminder that, you know, even if this goes very well and we pass a really good bipartisan, if possible, Magnuson reauthorization, we've got to go back to our appropriators and make sure that they put the dollars into these needs and in some cases new programs. We talked about technology and research and other things. You know, we will need to fight for those dollars.
Thank you. I know that we're coming to a close on our time together today, so I've not seen additional questions come in, but if you can reiterate, if they had a question they weren't able to ask or get answered, how do they get in touch with you? One more time.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So just go to my website. So I'm Congressman Jared Huffman. If you go to huffman.house.gov, you're going to see a Magnuson reauthorization section that has all sorts of resources for you there, including a link where you can send us your feedback on the discussion draft. You can download the discussion draft there. We'd love to hear from you and want to keep this process as transparent and inclusive as possible. It hasn't always been that way. And I think that's one of the reasons that we stumbled for a number of years, for several consecutive Congresses, because Magnuson, which used to be a very bipartisan, apolitical federal marine fisheries framework, kind of got hijacked by the partisanship of our times. We're trying to take some of that partisanship out and just make this about science and problem solving. And I hope after you take a look at our discussion draft, you agree that that this is a good, worthy effort, and we'll hope to include you in the feedback and the conversation going forward.
Thank you so much. Our final question comes from Charles Peterson. Can you expand on how the draft bill expands on essential fish habitat?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, the thing that we heard, especially from my salmon fishermen, I don't know if I would suspect people in Alaska feel this way too, but in California they certainly do, was essential fish habitat is nice, but it doesn't have any teeth in it. And so even if something is proposed that would be extremely destructive to, let's say, a salmon stronghold river or estuary, the most you're going to get under current law is, you know, maybe a strongly worded letter that a fish agency, you know, might write, or that a council might write, and there's no requirement that it even be responded to. So we want there to be a meaningful consultation. We think at a minimum, you ought to have a meaningful consultation if you're going to do something that adversely impacts essential fish habitat. Good example from your part of the world would be something like the Pebble Mine. Obviously, Bristol Bay is just the best salmon fishery in the world. And the fact that we didn't have any kind of enforceable tool under essential fish habitat to require that consultation is a pretty good example of what needs improvement.
That is a great example. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up today, I'd just like to give you the opportunity to offer any additional comments that you'd like to depart with.
No, just thank you. Obviously, this community that I'm talking to right now in Alaska is one of the great fisheries that we have in the United States. You have done a great job bringing us back from the dark old days of overfishing and showing us what sustainability can look like. So we appreciate that. We want to hear from you. And I hope that this is a conversation we'll be able to continue, culminating in a successful bill.
Thank you, Representative Huffman, for your time and your efforts, everything that you've done concerning the reauthorization of the MSA. I know we all look forward to getting even more updates in the future.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back at 10:45 with a brief overview of Westward Region Herring and Salmon Fisheries Management. Of course, the presentation you just heard and the rest you will hear today wouldn't have been possible without the generosity of our sponsors, which are going to be listed here in the chat and also below the presentation. We'll be back at 10:45. Thanks so much.